You know, sometimes people say, you can't make it up. This is one of those, you can't make it up. In fact, I tried to make this up at one point. It wasn't this good. This is incredible. All right, this is Paul Tibbets. He retired from the United States military as Brigadier General. He was a pilot in the United States Air Force during World War II. Here's another shot of him poking his head out of his plane window. And that plane, it had a name. You see it painted there in black, Enola Gay. General Tibbets actually named the plane himself. He named it after his mom, whose name was Enola Gay. And that plane is probably the most famous plane in American military history because Paul Tibbets piloted the Enola Gay when it, of course, dropped the world's first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. These days, the Enola Gay is on permanent display at the Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia. The Enola Gay, a piece of bold-faced American history. Today, the Associated Press published this database. It's basically a list that was compiled by the Trump administration of more than 26,000 photographs and websites that are on file with the U.S. Department of Defense. And the reason the AP published this database is because, according to their reporting, the Trump administration plans to wholesale delete all the 26,000 photos and websites that are listed in this Pentagon database. All 26,000 things here, the Trump administration wants all of these things scrubbed from the internet entirely. And included in that database, marked for deletion by Donald Trump, is this photo of Paul Tibbets and the Enola Gay. This photo from the United States Air Force website. And that's curious, right? I mean, it is the most famous plane in modern history. I don't know. Why would the Defense Department want to scrub that photo from the internet? It's not like deleting this photo is going to make people forget that we dropped that nuclear bomb on Japan. The tens of thousands of Department of Defense website images have been flagged for removal due to having content that highlighted diversity, equity, or inclusion. They searched the whole Defense Department website for the word gay and then ordered all the gay to be deleted. I'm serious. That's what happened. And I mean, substantively, it's confusing. This is like it's like the straightest thing I've ever seen, right? It's a giant metal machine from the 1940s. But maybe because he named it after his mom, does that mean he's sensitive? Does that make it kind of gay? Also, you know, you delete the photo of the gay plane, but then what? Do you have to also destroy the actual plane? Set it on fire, drop a bomb on it, although, using a bomb to destroy the plane that dropped the first atomic bomb, that might be seen as kind of poetic, and that is definitely gay. I should mention, it's not only the photo of the gay plane. This is Sergeant Major A.C. Gay. His photo has also been flagged to be deleted by the Defense Department because his name is gay. It's like that time that right-wing website in the mid-2000s decided they were going to change all the mentions of gay and all their news stories to be homosexual instead. You might remember we talked about this a few weeks ago. There was the American sprinter Tyson Gay was in the news. And on this right-wing website, they changed all their stories about Tyson Gay to be instead about Tyson homosexual. Tyson homosexual easily won his semifinal for the 100 meters at the U.S. Olympic track and field trials. Except now it's not some fringy conservative website. It is the U.S. Defense Department. We should send somebody to Chantilly to go check on poor Enola homosexual. See if she's doing okay. Your tax dollars at work, everybody. Making America... Making America... Never mind.
Nearly 6,000 veterans have already lost their jobs and been terminated from federal service at an unprecedented rate, and will all enter the civilian workforce with less protections. While my time is limited, I just wanted to say this. This isn't subjective. This is evidence. This is evidence in less than 2 months. This administration has proved itself to be the most anti-veteran administration ever. What's going on is just not right on so many levels.
Yeah, you called it the most anti-veterans administration in history.
It is. I mean, there's almost 6,000 veterans that are terminated. It was just reported today that 80,000 VA employees are going to be terminated. They have the most amount of veterans. It shows you that the billionaires are the ones who matter, you know, and they're going to step on anybody to get them what they want. So it's unfortunate, but a lot of people are going to suffer.
And you came to this town hall. Why?
I felt like someone needs to speak up for my patients, the most vulnerable people, and that's all the voices that we're hearing here. Many of them are people speaking up for vulnerable people, and so I feel like that's a responsibility of my job as a physician to represent my patients in this way.
Currently, over 2 million Arizonans are covered by Medicaid, including over 750,000 kids aged 0 to 17. The federal budget cuts could take coverage from 550,000 of the most vulnerable Arizonans.
What do you think the mood is generally in the state as far as the actions of this administration? And do you feel like things have changed since the election? Trump came to the state?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I think we're all trying to puzzle through it a little bit, but I feel like there's regret for sure.
I think the attorneys general believe that a big part of stopping this insanity is enlisting the American people.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a people-powered movement along with the AGs filing these lawsuits. So obviously, we will continue to file these lawsuits, continue to protect America from this out-of-control billionaire and president. But ultimately, we also have to make sure that these stories that are American stories and stories of people who are being devastated by these cuts are told so that everybody knows what's happening. And I think we learned a heck of a lot today.
Yeah.
These federal job cuts are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are real people, real families, and real consequences. In June, I will lose my job. As a father of a 3-year-old, this isn't just about my career, it's about my child's well-being right now. Without my job, I don't know how I will afford to keep her in preschool. The stress of this situation isn't just financial, it's emotional too. It's the fear of not knowing what comes next or having to make impossible choices between my daughter's education and basic needs. I have dedicated my career to education. That is 25 years of my life.
We haven't lost yet, by the way. We filed about 7 lawsuits. We haven't lost yet because what he's doing is illegal.
This isn't about partisan differences, right? This is about litigating the law, what is constitutional. And we've now reached a point in American politics where it's not like Democrats fighting the Republican administration. It's the chief law enforcement officers at the state level who are saying that's just plainly unlawful.
It's unlawful. Why do we
It's just a completely different world in American politics.
It sure is.
It's about legality at this point.
Well, we're in a new phase of American history when the chief executive of the country is absolutely unconcerned about the legal implications of his decision. It used to be that the president was like, well, is that legal? What do the precedents say? What do the statutes say? I'm here to execute the laws, not to violate the laws. Well, this president doesn't see it that way. The lawless, unregulated, just arbitrary way he's acting, and it means that we've got to stand up and oppose it, and I believe we're going to win.
My name is Jeff Thiemann. I've been a proud TSA employee for 22 and a half years. How many of y'all like to go to the airport and wait in the long TSA lines? Well, if it keeps going this way, it's only going to get worse. I stand before you today not just as an employee, but someone whose livelihood and whose family's well-being is directly impacted by the recent budget cuts and firings. We've given years, decades in many cases, of service to this country, and we deserve better than to be treated as disposable.
Now, I am a 10-point preferred veteran. Not that I give a crap about that because everybody goes, you're a veteran, you need to be protected. No. There are plenty of people in these organizations throughout the federal government, civil servants, that have dedicated their lives to these things. And excuse the parlance, but they're getting shit on right now, and it's crap. absolute garbage.
Good evening. I am a citizen, a veteran of the United States Air Force, and a concerned mother. And I received a phone call from my son, who is a federal employee, also a veteran, assigned to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Currently, my son is receiving daily harassing emails from DOJ demanding that he resign, demanding that he respond with 5 things he did at work this week. And as a mother, I am tormented knowing that my son and his family have sacrificed so much by accepting the assignment on Gitmo, only to be subjected to relentless harassment by the government he serves. This president and his billionaire buddy are destroying careers, disrupting lives, and causing untold stress with American households. We must stand up for these federal employees. We must fight for them to be reinstated to their jobs, and we must ensure that the felon in the White House respects the laws of the land.
All right, let's start with the photo. This appears in the New York Times. It looks like it might be from a freight elevator, maybe from the sort of atmospherics here, but you can see the caption there. Workers from the Department of Government Efficiency, DOJ, preparing to enter the offices of the U.S. African Development Foundation after U.S. Marshals opened the doors on Thursday afternoon. The New York Times and other places reporting on the kids from DOJ being let into this tiny federal agency that they had previously tried unsuccessfully to get into. They tried on Wednesday to get in, and the agency wouldn't let them in. They came back Thursday, and they were let into the agency by U.S. Marshals who opened the doors for them. Once inside, they reportedly changed the locks. So presumably behind those locked doors, they could go about the business of trying to dismantle that agency and fire everyone in it. Same basic story from the Washington Post, reporting that the DOJ kids showed up, quote, with 5 U.S. Marshals. The Post reporting that the people who work at that agency, they were warned by colleagues who were having lunch nearby who saw the DOJ kids coming, warned that the DOJ guys were on the way with U.S. Marshals. The staffers then used the stairs, not the elevator, to get out of the building. They slipped out that way. They left their belongings behind, quote, to avoid a confrontation with DOJ and the U.S. Marshals. So this is a very dramatic story, right, about a tiny agency created by Congress. Legally, only Congress has the authority to shut them down. Trump is trying to shut them down anyway, trying to use this DOJ entity that is under the control of his top campaign donor to do it. Maybe. They don't explain themselves much, but it seems like that's what they're doing. At this tiny agency, the staffers there tried to hold the line and keep operating as an agency by essentially keeping the doors closed, while the DOJ guys tried to muscle their way in, pounded on the door and said, let us in. Here's what I want to know, though. When those DOJ kids came back the second day, they came back on Thursday, and according to all the press reports, U.S. Marshals let them in the building. Was it U.S. Marshals? I mean, who is that in the elevator with the DOJ kids, really? We have reason to question whether the men reported as U.S. Marshals, now in multiple press accounts, are actually U.S. Marshals in the usual sense. We asked the Department of Justice about it, since the Marshals are part of DOJ. DOJ told us, quote, we are not making a statement at this time. We do request that you please verify with your sources to ensure your reporting would be accurate. We absolutely are trying. It would help a lot if you guys would answer the question, are those U.S. Marshals? That said, while that sort of unsettling detail remains outstanding, while we literally cannot tell who it is that's showing up apparently armed to let DOJ staffers into locked doors that legally they may not be allowed to be in, while that remains unsettled, whether this question of who is the armed escort for what DOJ is trying to do, The Justice Department appears to be conducting another one of their Friday night purges of career officials, firings at Main Justice in Washington, D.C. tonight and at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. 2 prosecutors from the corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams were placed on administrative leave tonight. Reporting from NBC News indicates that in Manhattan, those prosecutors were walked out of the building by U.S. Marshals. Joining us now is Ryan Riley, NBC News Justice reporter. Ryan, thanks very much for being here. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
This is a question that ultimately will have a simple answer. While it remains outstanding, I will admit to being a little unnerved. DOJ is involved in actions that a lot of people in government agencies say are not legal. This small agency that they tried very hard to get into and ultimately succeeded in getting into today said that they did not have the authority to come inside their offices, that Congress was the only entity that could dissolve this agency or fire its members. Nevertheless, DOJ was able to summon some sort of muscle, some sort of force to force them into that building physically, despite the fact that the agency told them no, they couldn't come in. Do you have any sense of who that muscle was or how we could find out?
Yeah, normally that's something that we would be able to find out from the Department of Justice, but I think there's so much chaos, and I really just can't underscore the amount of chaos that's happening inside DOJ at this moment. You not only had those prosecutors who were pushed out, you not only had these leadership changes that are being instituted today at DOJ, but you also have people going after individual, line attorneys who made critical comments of U.S. Attorney Ed Martin on social media, right? There's people who are now have been placed on administrative leave because of that. So, this force, the U.S. Marshals, is typically something that, follows judicial orders, or there's a process for, or they're following, that sort of procedure. They also have this critical role in protecting judges. So the idea that, actual U.S. Marshals were being sort of summoned by DOJ to go behind the scenes would be a big deal, but we just don't have the evidence to suggest right now that they are indeed U.S. Marshals. There's nothing from the government saying affirmatively that these were indeed Marshals. We just don't really have that reporting, and I think because of all of this just enormous level of chaos, it's really difficult to get straight answers out of the Department of Justice at the moment. And there's so many people behind the scenes, I think, who are really worried about speaking out and talking to reporters just about what's going on there, because they're worried about the consequences that will have for them. Typically, being a federal government employee, you have some level of security, and even though it was difficult to get sources to talk to you, that people weren't worried about just being instantly kicked out for any contact whatsoever, or for sort of various reasons, or because someone has a grudge against them. And that has sort of been thrown out the window in the last few weeks. People are really afraid for their jobs, and there's certainly folks who are speaking out, and I appreciate every single one of them who's, contacting me over Signal or what have you. But it's a really chaotic situation inside the Justice Department right now, and not a lot of certainty about what's going to happen next.
Yeah, a chaotic situation in terms of the firings, a chaotic situation in terms of obviously some of the ethics and the ethical and legal issues happening, but also impossible to get straight answers as to the use of force inside the U.S. government, one part of the government against another. This is very unsettling stuff, and I know you're on it, Ryan. I know that if anybody's going to be able to figure it out, you will. Ryan Riley, NBC News Justice reporter. Thanks for working so hard on these stories. It's such a tough time, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Heather, thanks so much for joining us. Straight out of the gate, give me a really quick breakdown on how tariffs actually work, because there's so much misinformation that's being pushed out by the Trump administration.
Well, tariffs in general, they're a tax on goods that come into the country. And, often we think of these as a policy that can help revitalize manufacturing or things that are made in the country. And I think what we have here is a real misunderstanding on the part of the Trump administration about what creates economic growth. During the Biden administration, we focused on doing things that would revitalize and invest in really important sectors across the country, like semiconductors and clean energy. And what we saw was this massive private investment in those new industries, creating economic opportunity all across the country. And yet this administration is not continuing those kinds of policies and threatening to pare back on the investments in semiconductors, for example, that the president talked about last week. And instead, this indiscriminate, very chaotic tariff policy that the president is putting in place and pretending that that will have benefits for American workers and American communities across the country in the way that we need them to see benefits.
You know, Heather, for example, the United States and Mexico have a trade agreement. Trump actually signed it in January of 2020 to get rid of NAFTA. It's called the USMCA. How does something like that trade agreement work with these flip-flops with the tariff announcements that we get from Trump?
Well, it doesn't, right? I mean, we have an agreement. We've had this longstanding agreement with Canada and Mexico, and now the president is coming in and, you know, sometimes on an hourly basis, changing his mind on what he thinks the tariff policy will be. I mean, if nothing else, that is no way to run a country. It's chaotic. It means that businesses can't make sound decisions. Investors can't make decisions. There's likely a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines now, waiting to see where this all ends up. And it undermines our ability to make agreements with other countries about what kinds of trade we want to see. I mean, there's no doubt trade is so important, but we need it to be benefiting American workers and American communities. But part of that is having sane policies that are, that are thought through and aren't in this sort of very chaotic way that the president is doing it.
And let's be clear, Trump won in large part because he made promises that apparently have been empty to fix the economy. But according to a recent Reuters poll, a majority of Americans, Heather, 54% disapprove of his moves. And we've also seen how much chaos is caused in the stock market because Trump is just all over the place when he does this. How do any of these financial and economic moves by Donald Trump benefit the American worker?
Well, quite frankly, they don't. And let's be very, very clear, I think, what is happening here. You know, the Republicans have in Congress have just put forward their budget plan a couple of weeks ago, where they want to cut taxes for the richest Americans and the wealthiest corporations by over $4 trillion. That's a plan. It's the only real plan that I see coming out of this administration, a clear agenda to give money back to the richest people in the country. And at the same time, all of this chaos, it's keeping us distracted when in reality what this is about is tax cuts for the rich. And we know that those tax cuts will lead to cuts in services all across the country, the kinds of things that Elon Musk is putting in place in a very chaotic way. Those are threatened now to really have long-term implications if we see these tax cuts going into effect.
You know, I think, too, Heather, something that underscores the importance of smart, competent cabinet officials is, of course, not having somebody like Elon Musk driving the bus. But we look at our Treasury Secretary, right, who, by all admissions, is not somebody who doesn't have experience in the world of economics and finance. But how important is it then to make sure that you have a Treasury Secretary who actually tells the president, this doesn't work? This is actually hurting the American economy, and you shouldn't be doing this.
Well, the president has made very clear that he wants folks around him that will implement only his views or Elon Musk's views, right? Yeah. Time and again, we've seen that Musk has had this incredible power to make decisions for agencies all across the government, whether or not it makes sense for those agencies or for the services that Americans need and rely on. So it's really undermining the expertise of the folks he did put in place. And, you know, I think they have very difficult jobs, especially when it's your job, like this Treasury Secretary, to make sure that the economy remains stable and is on a solid footing, which, of course, right now, many Americans do not believe that is the case.
Very quickly, before I have to let you go, though, Heather, what can Americans be doing right now to maybe protect themselves or to gird themselves against what looks like serious economic turmoil?
Well, Americans made their decision in November, and I think many of us knew that this is what folks were told would happen. We were told that this would be about tax cuts for the rich. The president did say that he would focus on prices and jobs, and that is certainly not what we see him focusing on. So people need to continue to, make their voices heard on things that matter. But having an economy like we saw over the previous 4 years that delivered jobs month after month, that closed economic inequality, that invested in manufacturing and cutting-edge sectors that are important to economic competitiveness all across the country. Those are the kinds of the priorities that if Americans want to see, they're going to have to raise their voices.
And for the people in the back, because you were so gracious not to say it, that was the Biden-Harris administration that did all of those things that benefited Americans. Heather Boushey, thank you for taking the time to be here and explain these important issues to our viewers.
Well, Donald Trump's will he or won't he tariff tactics are a guessing game that's hurting our allies and American businesses, even economists, people. Everyone's confused, literally. On Friday, Donald Trump said that he may slap Canada with tariffs on dairy and lumber. But he hasn't decided yet, and that was after Trump paused tariffs for a month on a wide range of products from Canada and Mexico. The whiplash is causing more uncertainty for business owners and Americans just trying to make ends meet. And new this morning, China is now hitting Canada with its own round of tariffs, a sign that Trump's trade wars could have far-reaching effects. The New York Times reports, quote, the Chinese tariffs are a clear warning to Canada and indirectly Mexico not to cooperate with the United States on trade. Well, joining us now to discuss it all is former Florida Congressman David Jolly and special correspondent for Vanity Fair, Molly Jong-Fast. Both are MSNBC political analysts.
Good morning to you both.
It's very confusing.
It's very confusing, absolutely. David, I want to sort of unpack a little bit of the confusion, though, because I always thought the art of negotiation was you get in a room, you lay everything on the table, you work out the terms, and then you make an announcement and you stick to it. Because you figured it out. You don't go, today I'm going to do X, tomorrow, about X, we're not doing that. So you have this, at the core of this, though, is the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, which Donald Trump, by the way, negotiated during his first term. It is a very complex process with respect to trade. You're now throwing in another level of tariffs on top of that. It creates the kind of tensions that we're now seeing play out. And given the fact that the administration doesn't seem to have a clue really what it wants to do, I want you to listen to Peter Navarro, Trump's economic trade advisor, sort of saying, oh, no, there's no confusion here. We know exactly what we're doing. Let's take a listen.
I reject the idea that there's uncertainty. The uncertainty is created by the fact that people don't take President Trump at his word. Now, with respect to the negotiations that we're having now with Canada and Mexico, the way the media portrays it is, oh, the president put tariffs on and then he takes them off and we're not certain what's happening. If you just simply parse what's going on, David, it's a negotiation and we're winning.
Okay, I'll just leave that. You just go ahead and make a comment on that, because
Look, Peter Navarro's lying. The uncertainty is because people are taking Donald Trump at his word, particularly his counterparts, our allies in all of these trade conversations and negotiations. Look, big picture here, I think we've reached the person, woman, man, camera, TV portion, cognitive portion of the first 50 days. Donald Trump has no idea what he's doing right now. I mean, I think that is absolutely clear. As a matter of trade policy, if you are trying to pivot the domestic economy in a certain direction, which we last saw in a major way in the 90s, moving from manufacturing to service. You do that slowly, deliberately. You do it as an ally of domestic manufacturing and industry and the financial community. You do it in partnership, frankly, with our allies. That's not this. And to your point about how do you negotiate a deal, first thing you do is you stick to your original position. Donald Trump keeps backing it up, and he can't even articulate why we're doing this. This is not about generating a new domestic economy. If so, that takes a much more sober approach. It's also not about drugs, because Donald Trump's the guy that pardoned the kingpin of Silk Road, the largest operator of drug trafficking in the world. He pardoned him. So this is not about Donald Trump's conviction about drugs. I think this is an unstable, irascible, angry president who doesn't understand economic theory, is not following the advice of his cabinet and economists across the world, but he just likes to pick a fight. This is a dangerous time, and the word uncertainty and stability is ultimately what could ruin this entire economy, because what markets need is certainty, either certainty going in one direction or the other. What they can't handle is the whiplash because you can't plan around it. Donald Trump has this economy teetering on stagflation. Watch out if we move in that direction, because his numbers already soft will plummet.
I would argue, Molly, I agree with David Jolly that this is not about good economic policy. This is not about what's in the best interest of the American people. Yes, Donald Trump likes to pick a fight. I also think this is about building an imperial presidency. This from Axios about how Trump 2.0 is different than 1.0. The 2018 to 2019 tariffs were implemented by invoking sections 232 and 301 of the trade statutes, the former giving the president authority to impose duties on national security grounds and the latter to combat unfair trade practices. Those laws demand a process of studies and appeals which slowed their implementation while preventing unintended consequences. By contrast, this week's new round of tariffs invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which gives the president broad powers with few checks to deal with, quote, any unusual and extraordinary threat. That, to me, is the through line between so much of what they are doing.
Right. No, I mean, look, this is the larger problem with this administration. They are doing Project 2025, and how they're doing it is slightly different than we thought that how it would be, right? They're doing it through DOGE, but they're cutting the National Weather Service and they're dismantling the guardrails. And this is not surprising. And in fact, it's funny because you see Tom Cole, right, from Oklahoma, chair of House Appropriations, very important, committee, saying, thank you, Elon, for saving these little bits of government, right? This is Congress's job. They have given up their power. We are watching it in real time. So I agree, this is the imperial presidency in action, and it is, and again, we have our allies terrified, right? We have Canada embracing Canadian nationalism. Like, who even saw that as an option?
I mean, to put a finer point on it, Molly is right. Canadian nationalism for Canadians, they are removing California wines from store shelves, according to some NBC News and reporting. They are pushing Buy Canadian to counter higher costs. They are uncharacteristically brandishing unvarnished anger over what they see as a betrayal of a longtime friend. The Canadians are saying they ain't coming to visit America. They're canceling trips. They are pissed off, and rightfully so. Look, David Jolly, there was this article in the New York Times, I believe over maybe 2 days ago, and it talked about how Donald Trump's 51st state language as it relates to Canada is actually quite serious, and the Canadians are taking it very seriously, and it is further angering them. And I think that what we are seeing is the President of the United States looking to bring Canada to its knees economically, and this is economic warfare, if you will, and the Canadians are currently grappling with what that means for them. I mean, there's an election that is going to be held sometime this year, and the issue of how to deal with America is going to be front and center for Canadians. You juxtapose that with Republicans here in America who are speaking out against the president, saying tariffs are not good. We don't want these tariffs. We have to be careful how we do this. The bourbon from Kentucky, the bourbon distilleries are very upset, and Rand Paul is speaking out about it. This is serious business, right, David?
Simone, I agree with all that. I worry there's something much more insidious here, and I think it's Donald Trump's vision of a global realignment of the world order. And what I mean by that is, from national security measures to economic measures, Donald Trump has been attacking our allies since he got in. And if you were trying to take down the country from within, there are three things you would do. You would disrupt our strategic alliances around the world, those of national security and economic security. You would disrupt the ability of the federal government to deliver services to the people. That is DOGE. And excuse me, you would do economic security, you would do DOGE, and then I forget the last one. Let's say violate the Constitution. I'm sorry. But the point here on the insidious piece is disrupting the world order and creating a new alignment. The attacks we are seeing on NATO and our European allies as it relates to Ukraine, the comfort that he gets from Vladimir Putin, the economic disruption with our allies, Canada, Mexico, name them. All of this leads in 2 or 3 years to Donald Trump saying that the West has turned against us and that our allies might be Russia and China. I really think that's the insidious piece about this. He's declared war on our allies. He's done it through economic means. He's done it in the national security posture. And that creates a new world order that I think Donald Trump is flirting with and creates a very, very dangerous global environment.
So, Molly, what David raises is an absolute correct point in terms of the strategic effort by the Trump administration to reorder things. So that raises up a counter question. So how do we respond to that? And who are those who are prepared to lay out some level of opposition or resistance to that? On the economic front, I found it interesting in a column by Congressman DeLuzio, who pushed back on this idea that, neoliberal economists who think tariffs are always bad. He noted, rather than reflexively condemning all tariffs, Democrats should be highlighting how Trump's scattershot threats, unanchored to any real industrial strategy, will not deliver on the goals of rebuilding American manufacturing, raising wages, or rebalancing trade. For one thing, tariffs are effective only when used in a predictable and stable way, and the Trump administration won't approach has been anything but. When I read that, I sort of get this sort of conflicting perspective. You tell me that, reflexive condemnation of all tariffs is bad, but then go on to tell me why condemnations of all tariffs should take place. So help me out here. How do Democrats thread this needle narratively to help Americans contextualize what's happening to them?
So here's what I would say. I think that what has happened is there's another piece to this, which is there is not the same strong mainstream nonpartisan media there was in 2016. It is much, much, much smaller. So it has fallen on a lot of these Democratic senators to narrate what's happening, right? Like to explain what they've seen in the last 7 weeks. And I've seen some Democrats do that. And I think what's been smart is where you've seen places like Bernie Sanders go in and give town halls where Republicans won't. Or you've seen Chris Murphy narrate, he did a speech on the floor of the Senate where he talked about what had happened in the last 6 weeks. That kind of stuff, there are some really popular things that Republicans are trying to take away, right? Like in that top line reconciliation bill, it had $880 billion from Medicaid over 10 years. That will mean closing rural hospitals. That will mean closing nursing homes. Those kind of things are popular, right? It's unpopular stuff, and they have to just continually sort of narrate what's happening for voters, because if they don't do it, no one else will.
Right.
And they got to get out of that. These are good tariffs. These are bad tariffs. Okay, but right now we're dealing with a man that don't know the difference.
Right.